I use the term take a step back all the time. Take a step back with my team, right? And understand. Yeah, you're right. We can spend too much time planning. We can spend too much time scoping. Once we get into the audit, though, we should just be focusing on what we said we were going to do, right? And I think that once we get there, right, we can stop. I would say we can always have another audit, right? We can split audits into two, right? If we come up to a conclusion like, hey, we found something, okay, that's awesome. That thing we found might be more risky than the thing that we're looking for. So let's wrap up what we're doing now so that we don't have this two-headed monster.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Audit Podcast. I'm your host, Trent Russell, and today on the show, we have Mike Padilla. Mike's the Senior Manager, Internal Audit, and a SOX leader at Starbucks. Mike also speaks at IIA conferences pretty frequently, and he was also featured in the Internal Auditor magazine. Some of the things that Mike and I talk about is how internal auditors have got to stop taking ourselves so seriously as auditors. I think it's okay and great to be proud of it, but Mike's perspective, and a lot of this revolves around recruiting, especially college folks, and how the perception of how seriously we take ourselves and how that doesn't come across fantastic with college-aged kids who already think that it's basically I go to a Big Four firm or I'm bust, basically. We talk about why we have IT versus business process auditors and what we can do about that to merge those two skills together, which has been a topic on this show, I think, since the very beginning. I feel like within the first 10 episodes, we were talking about something very similar. Now you could throw in AI with that as well, and I think it'd be applicable. And then we talk about the most important thing in building an audit function, which I was a little surprised by Mike's answer, but as he explained it, it makes a ton of sense. So here we go. Mike, what's in your either internet browsing history, ChatGPT history, Copilot history, anything like that? What's been kind of going on in your world?
Yeah, aside from how to audit, right? Just in general, how do I do this audit, right? Probably it's tips and tricks to get better at golf. When I'm not auditing, I work from home, right? And so I'm kind of just like in this room all the time. And so one of the things that I actually can do, and I try to do about once a week, is just get out and do 9 holes of golf. And you would think that as much as I golf, I would be good. But no, I'm constantly looking for those tips and tricks. So that's probably, if you looked on my browser, it's like, how do I get rid of this slice for good?
Because there's so many of those. So I play a
Right.
couple times a year. I don't really we went to
Yeah.
Top Golf over the weekend, and that was
Yeah.
the first time
Yeah,
I
that's
swung
fun.
a club since 2024.
Yeah.
But I got really into golf right after I graduated college and watched all the shows, golf, what magazine, digest, whatever it was. And
All of it. Yeah.
there's so many tips and tricks that my brain was just like, this is too much for me. I took the grip it and rip it approach. I was like, I'm just going to hit the ball and hope that it goes. Is there anything that you found in doing all this that you're like, yeah, but if you do this one thing, it really actually helps?
Yeah, grip it and rip it.
Okay.
Is what I found. No, I think what I found with this, and this is probably can be related to the business world, is that there's just so much out there, right? Like you said, and it's really just taking one of those things or two of those things and saying, okay, I'm gonna kind of try and practice this. But ultimately, for me, it's like you said, I go up to the ball and I hit the ball. Right. When I'm actually playing, when I'm practicing, right, I'll be trying new things. But when you're playing, right, go up to the ball, hit the ball. Same thing, when you're talking to management, right? When you have a speaking engagement, when you have, you can practice, you can prepare, but just go up there and do it, right? And that's kind of, the best advice I have. I'm still not any good. It's the best thing I still refer back to is just watch yourself hit the ball, right? Don't pick your head up. And it was like the first thing you learned as a kid. Don't pick your head up. But yeah, if you just go up if you go up and hit the ball and watch yourself hitting the ball, you'll make contact. You may not shoot an 80, but you'll make contact.
Good stuff. All right. So the key to golf is to hit the ball. All right.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
pretty
Great
groundbreaking stuff.
The key to golf.
Hey, everybody, we're going to take a quick break from our guests. And if you need to get analytics or AI actually working in your internal audit department, or if you already have some of it, you feel like you're not really getting exactly what you need out of it, there's more, you're not getting that, Go to the show notes, look for the Green Skies Analytics link, click it. On the website, there'll be other links that you can click that'll take you directly to a calendar to schedule time. It's literally 3 clicks to get the time scheduled, to get it figured out. All right, back to the show. Conference stuff and speaking. I know you've done a ton of sessions at various conferences and things like that. And that's kind of where we wanted to hang out a little bit, is
Sure.
from some of your experience in doing those. But one of the things that you said is that at a recent audit conference you went to, that basically everything was AI, like every topic, even if it wasn't AI in the title, at some
Right.
point in the session, they're like, oh yeah, AI, right?
Mm.
But you said
It
there's
was
other
probably
audit.
AI in the title. Yeah.
Yeah. You said there's other audit stuff going on. What's the other audit stuff going on that you're like, okay, we get it, AI, but also this. What else?
Yeah, and I think we had kind of touched on this too. Is like I'm a big fan of doing a lot of the soft skill stuff, of doing a lot of hey, you know, actually going back to some of the basics, right? Some of the presentations I have are on socks, right? And socks isn't like the cool new thing, right? It's actually the opposite of that. So I think, a lot of times it's, you go to the conference and it's AI, 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 right? That's what we're talking about. Before that, it was blockchain, 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 right? We gotta get this in our heads, right? So and I think the topics right now on AI are really great. And I am not an expert on AI, so when I go to the conferences, I think it's great to kind of learn and pick up some of that. But I think a lot of it too is sometimes when people go to conferences, they're also looking at like, hey, how do I just do my day-to-day job better? Right. They're looking for less of the theoretical, which I think we have a lot of now, especially in the speaking circuit, right? It's kind of like this concept, right? Of like, hey, we're going to talk about AI, right? And I think a lot of it is, how do I use this? I think one of the things that's kind of overlooked sometimes is that as auditors, or for auditors, there's a lot of small shops, right? There's a lot of teams of 1 to 5, right? And first off, they're probably not even going to these conferences, right? They probably don't have the budget to go to these conferences. But when I was working at the IAA, one of the things that we kept hearing was like, hey, we want to hear some stuff. One, that is not conceptual, but it's, that we can actually do and take back. But two, it's for the smaller shops. So coming back to AI, right? If we want to have this conversation of like, hey, there's tools out there, and there are tons of people doing consulting for AI, and there's all this stuff, right? And I think that's great. I think something that would be very valuable, especially for the smaller teams, if there was, and there's probably something out there, but if there was a session on um, using AI in Excel, right? And using AI for the everyday, or AI outside of or I'm sorry, outside of large language models, right? Because a lot of times when we talk about AI, we're kind of talking in general about large language models, right? ChatGPT, right? I think what would be interesting to hear more of is just kind of like how are audit teams auditing machine learning, right? Things like that. Whereas maybe you're not doing it, but that's at least interesting. And then again, just how can a regular auditor use AI or analytics or whatever it is if you're not a huge shop,
Yeah.
right? If you're not one of the Fortune 500.
I like how you said, actually use it. We did, I think, like most people kind of have their, you do these sessions too. And so once you do one, you've got it really well and you can kind of repeat it multiple times. And so the one that I've probably done the most is I forget the exact title, but it's how to actually do analytics in internal audit or something like that. And it's very simple. Like I pull it up and I go, this is exactly how you could, like, this is literally a page from the methodology that we use for analytics within internal audit. Here it is, and then we show them how to do it. So I like that you said actually. That's always one I usually try to include in the title. And then you also said 1 to 5, like most internal audit teams have like 1 to 5. I don't know if I know I heard Richard Chambers say this, and I don't know. I would assume that's pretty accurate. But he wasn't like reading from a report or anything. It was just like on stage one time. But he said, I think it's 70 or 80% of internal audit departments have less than 5 or less than 7. I forget what it is, but you're right. It is the overwhelming majority have less than 5.
I hadn't heard that stat before. I don't mean I assume if Richard Chambers said it, it's probably true, right? But yeah, no, I believe it, right? Because when you think about things like governments, or small shops, and these are the orgs that are really fighting for their jobs, right, per se, right? Because if you're Fortune 500, right, if you have a team of 100 auditors, right, like you don't need to make the case for yourself. If you have a team of 5 auditors, you need to make the case that you have 5, right? Because even if they keep your department, right, it's, hey, maybe you can do this with 3, right? So I think that's where it's really important to kind of have that, the actuals, right? The what can I do? I I have heard it several times of like, hey, this is great, but like, what can I take back? What can I take back? I do have to give a plug. I have a presentation on AI. It's actually a little bit of a zag. It's AI through the lens of Hollywood. So again, as I mentioned, I'm not a data scientist or anything, but what we did with it was we looked at all of your movies, right? So think about Terminator and Blade Runner, and going all the way back to Metropolis and the movie AI and some of the Asimov movies like Bicentennial Man, right? And kind of just looking at that and saying like, hey, this is what we think AI is, but what is it really, right? And a lot of it is right now it's the large language model. It's how can we do our jobs better? How can we use it as a tool, right? And one of the takeaways that I had for that presentation was if you don't have an audit over the governance of AI at your organization, start planning it for tomorrow, right? And governance is pretty straightforward, right? Who owns it? Is there a policy? What's the policy? Are we abiding by the policy? I mean, that is an audit if you haven't done, and that's an audit you can do if you're a team of 5, right? Because everyone's using it, and probably the teams of 5, the smaller organizations, they're probably it's probably a lot more Wild West at those organizations, right? Because maybe it's not all blocked, right? So that was my takeaway, right? We talked a lot about movies. I had a couple of people come up to me after the conference, after the presentation, and say that was really awesome, and they wanted to talk movies. And then I had, you get the results, your poll, your what's it called, the feedback. You get the feedback a couple weeks later from the conference, and it was just kinda split, right? It was like people who were really into it, and then people were just like, "I didn't understand that. Why was he talking about movies the whole time?" So you kinda have to take that, and I knew that going in, right? But again, I think hopefully my tidbit at the end, well, I mean, my takeaway was, AI is not gonna kill us, at least now. We're not at the Terminator, right? We're really at use it as a tool. Use it to make your lives better. But yeah, my takeaway there was really like if you haven't done an audit of governance, or if you're not doing periodic audits of governance over AI, that is something you can do tomorrow. That is something that is 5 steps.
And I would add to that, if there's not an AI governance process in place or committee, like I would just go ask that question, like, what's our governance around AI? Do we have a committee? Whatever. They said no, I'd immediately go, all right, audit finding. Go like we have to have that.
That's the easiest audit you've done,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Just go ask the question. If they say no, you can. I'd print the report and already have it in my hand and go, here, take this. like,
Yeah. A 100%. I mean, I think that's one of the things that me and you talked about also before was just kind of like this. Sometimes, we're auditor. What are we great at? We're great at being analytical, right?
mhm.
We're great at giving assurance, and sometimes we want to give that 100% assurance, right? And what I've seen sometimes is that just can sometimes make your audit go. You can always find more, right? You can always dig more. I can give you 100 steps to do for an AI governance audit, right? But if that takes me 2 years, right, then it's not relevant. If I gave my audit committee an audit report tomorrow and it just said red, no AI governance, right? That's at least meaningful
Yeah.
for them, right? And then I can go to them and then I can say, okay, well, where do you want me to dig, right? Whereas a lot of
Yeah.
times we just do that digging because we're good at digging,
What
right?
what I'm gonna ask this
Yeah,
like pretty directly, but even before
sure.
that, I haven't watched Terminator since I was like a kid.
Yeah. Okay.
And it was streaming on, I think it's on Max or something. I don't know, Hulu or something. And so I saw it. This is probably a month ago, and I was like, "Yeah, let me just sit down and rewatch this from start to
Sure.
finish." And as it was
Yeah.
playing out, minus the time travel thing, I was like, "Yeah, this could happen." It's like, yeah, that might happen. I don't think we have the time travel thing figured out, but the rest of it, it's not
So
totally impossible. Okay. Anyway, so what is the? How do you know when to stop? Because I
can I
think
can I
we've
address the
talked about
Terminator
that.
thing?
You see it with especially and maybe it's just a judgment call and you develop that over time, but you see it a lot more with staff and more junior people, and they just like audit the thing to death, and you're like, we're pretty good, like you've crushed it, you can stop now. Like, but in planning, I see people spend like weeks and weeks during planning because it's
Mhm.
just like every little thing. Is there, other than just pull yourself out of the weeds every now and again and go, is this good enough at this point?
Yeah, between my golf tips, I don't know if I'm giving real groundbreaking information here, but I use the term take a step back all the time. Take a step back with my team, right? And understand yeah, you're right. We can spend too much time planning, we can spend too much time scoping. Once we get into the audit though, we should just be focusing on what we said we were going to do, right? And I think that once we get there, right, we can stop. I would say we can always have another audit, right? We can split audits into two, right? If we come up to a conclusion like, hey, we found something, okay, that's awesome. That thing we found might be more risky than the thing that we're looking for. So let's wrap up what we're doing now so that we don't have this two-headed monster, right? Because we've seen that before where we said, okay, we're doing this audit. Now we dug, we found something else. Man, now this audit's not going to get released, until we figure out this new thing. Issue the first audit, right? And I think that's a lot. You'll see a lot of this on LinkedIn too. Is this kind of like what should an audit report look like? What does the audit committee want to see? Ultimately, the form and the format doesn't matter that much, right? You could call your audit committee chair and say, "Hey, we have this. It's red. It's high risk," and that could be your audit report, right? You could tweet it, right? We were talking about social media the other day, right? Hopefully, you're not tweeting your audit reports, but it could be in the form of whatever 48 characters, however many long Twitter is, right? It can be that, and I think people are leaning more towards that. So, I think a lot of it is structuring your audits and making sure that it's set up. Making sure that your team is set up, making sure that they have the right tools and making sure that they have the right deadlines in place. And one of the things I say, a lot of my job is actually doing socks, right? And I jokingly say that my socks audits are always successful and they're always on time. Well, they're always on time because we have a filing deadline. My SOX audits are never late because I have no choice, right? So I think it's having that mindset of saying, like, here is our deadline. And I think one way to look at it maybe is to set that deadline, and if you have loose ends or if management doesn't agree, you just put it in the report and say, hey, look, we didn't come to a conclusion on this. It's you don't always have to come to a conclusion on everything all the time, and then maybe that's the loose end that becomes your next audit. But yeah, I think it is important to issue audits timely because things are moving so fast, and right, we have new risks are coming up every day. Like, we're not in the world where you just had your annual risk assessment and, hey, these are the risks that you're going to have through the year, right? You have to be able to say, well, we have a new risk now. And so I want my team spending time on this new risk. And so we have to kind of stick to that time frame that we had for our audits. And it's not easy. I'm not the best at it, but setting those time frames and again, like I said, socks is great, right? I know I'm going to finish socks on time every year.
The A couple things. So I know there's always a lot of conversation, like you said, on LinkedIn, the format of the audit report. I'm putting that in quotes. I think I forget. I'm not going to quote the standards, but it's something to the effect of we just have to communicate the finding. It doesn't say you have to write a report to do it. Um, and so I think that's important to share that. We've said that on the show before, but I think it's important for people to know that no, it does not have to be a written report. We actually did a there's a team out of Italy, and their CAE came on, and he said that every report they do, a report again in quotes, is a video. So they make a video. It's like 2 minutes long or something like that. Um, and that's what they send. And the CEO watches all the videos, and like everybody watches the videos. And he said there's a lot of advantages to it. One though being is like the actual staff that does the audit, they get, I'm gonna put a lot of air quotes today, FaceTime with the CEO because they're the ones that are doing the video and they get to practice communications and all this kind of good stuff. So it was pretty, that one was pretty interesting. Um, the other thing I have heard the idea of, let's try to don't literally tweet it out, but like if you were going to make this audit report a Twitter post, what would it look like? And basically as a way to say, we don't need a 10-page audit report, however many characters it is for a tweet. I don't know, but um, just keep it at that. And that's basically all they need to know. So I like that you hit on both of those.
That's all they need to know, and that's all they want to to read, right? We're actually really good at writing 10-page audit reports. We're not good at writing 48 character audit reports, but I think one of the things that, and again, um, uh, just having maybe a couple tiers, right? If you want that 10 pages of data, that's fine. Put that as an appendix, right? And then you have maybe 1 page, right? Or from a video, right? 1 minute, right? And then you should also have the, if this went to my audit committee chair and they're super busy, what do they need to know? What is it? How bad is it? What are we doing about it? When's it going to be fixed? Right? Can you give me 4 sentences? Hopefully we are able to do that. We're pretty smart people, right? But we get in our own way sometimes.
That's a really good again, don't do this on the publicly available instances, ChatGPT, Copilot, but if you have it locked down
Right.
enterprise wide, you're good
Absolutely.
to go. To take it and just say like, hey, summarize this for the audit committee. I've done things like that where literally the words just didn't fit on the PowerPoint slide, or I forgot what it was, maybe the title of a podcast episode or something. And I was like, hey, just I need this to be,
Yeah.
I forgot what it was, but I had to like count the number of characters and it was like 36. I said, rewrite this, but make it 36 characters. And it did it. And I was like, that was one of the greatest things. The
It is, yeah.
speaking of just like the one sentence thing there, I was in the office of the CAE one time a while back, and we were talking about analytics and AI and all that kind of good stuff. And then he's like, all right, I got to go talk to my audit committee. He had like his audit committee meeting that day. And
Mhm.
he had a piece of paper printed out, 4 bullet points. And I was like, is that the agenda? And he went, yep, that's it. I just walked in there with these 4 bullet points. And I thought that was one of the
That was
cooler
his
things that I've
that was
seen.
all, yeah, just a piece of paper with four bullet
Yep,
points.
and that was it. And he's like, "Yep, that's all I gotta do this time." I went, "All right, that's awesome." What about on the recruiting trail to switch things up a little bit? What is that like as far as recruiting college folks? How's that been going? What's the perception you feel like they might have of internal audit? I feel like the perception is something we always have to kind of fight against.
Yeah. Yeah. So, a couple things with that. As a volunteer for the Central Florida chapter, we try and reach out to the local universities and have as much, visibility as possible. And we have a professor on our board, right, which is great because it's kind of great to have that level of access with the students. And he actually teaches an internal audit class.
Perfect.
And so some of the things we've heard from that is that, and this is probably not shocking, right? That class is the first time they've heard the words internal audit,
Right.
right? And again, this is nothing new, but the big push is really for students. Hey, look, you gotta get your accounting degree. You gotta get your MBA now because of the CPA requirements. And I know that's changing or might be changing in some states, right? But that's, you got to get 150 credit hours and you got to sit for the CPA and you got to go work for a big four firm.
Mhm.
Right. And I'll be the first to say, hey, that's great advice. You can have a great career if you do that. But I think what gets lost in what I saw with a lot of my peers was just kind of that kind of burnout of like, I don't know if I want to do all this
Yeah.
stuff, right? That this is great and I want to do all this stuff, but this might be someone else's version of it. And so I think that's where internal audit really kind of comes in and says, hey, we're a little bit different, right? So a lot of us are accountants as a background, but we don't have to be, right? And CPA is a great thing, but we don't have to have a CPA. We can have something like a CIA or a CFE or a CISA. A lot of stuff is now going towards, advisory now as opposed to assurance. So, but what I have seen is the students are really open, right? Because they're like, hey, this is kind of something a little bit different. But what we've heard from our professor is that it used to be, hey, your senior year, you go in and you do the job fairs and you find a job,
Yeah.
right? If you were lucky. When it was me, it was just kind of like, hey, I graduated, now what?
Yeah.
Um, now then it kind of moved to a senior year. Then it was, well, you have to have an internship your junior year, right? You get the internship your junior year, that guarantees that you're going to have the job, senior. What our professor who's on our uh, the professor who was on our IIA board was saying was that now they're recruiting at I'm sorry, at the sophomore level, right? So these are students who haven't even taken an accounting class, right? Or maybe they've just signed up for their accounting class and they think, well, this is what I want to do. So they're looking for, are you a 4.0 student? Do you go to a big college? And are you taking accounting, right? So if you have those three things, the big four is gonna snatch you up, right? They're gonna say, hey, we're gonna,
Yeah.
auditor tax, right? And we haven't really changed that mindset. And I think, kind of coming back to internal audit, right, is that we've always had um, this crisis of, what are we? What do we do? I don't know. Let me ask you a question. Trent, do you have the elevator pitch? Do you have what do you do as an auditor?
Yeah. So mine is, how like every company has a strategy, right? Right. We understand what the strategy is, and then we're kind of like process improvement for that strategy to make sure that it works. And I know, like, that's the end of it, basically. And I know there's a lot of language in there that if Norman Marks heard that, would
Yeah.
go, nope, you can't say that, and we don't do that, and we don't do that. And I go, yep, I get that, we don't make sure of anything, and nothing's 100% and all that kind of good stuff.
Well,
And no, it's not always against a strategy, but I feel like that's the easiest way for me to communicate. Like, this is what we actually do. And it's
right.
not, we're going to check boxes and read through financial statements the entire time. I was going to ask you, I'm glad you asked me, because I was going to ask you, like, what is your pitch basically to students to be like,
Yeah.
internal audit is this, not what you think it is.
Yeah. So first off, shout out to Norman Marks. If you guys aren't following Norman, follow him. He's just got some really great insights,
One of the
and a
best.
lot of it,
One of the
a
best.
lot of it is again, we were talking about like conceptual versus actual, right? A lot of it is like just actual, right? It's like, yeah, in theory, there'll be a LinkedIn post and it'll be, in theory, you should be doing this, this, and this. And Norman will say, well, yeah, but you only need to do this.
Yeah.
Right. You can do all of these things, but let's take it back to the basics. What should we be
It's
doing?
very good at that.
As far as the pitch, right? And this is beyond college students, right? Is because we have to tell people, we have people people don't know what internal auditors do, right? Oh, you do taxes? No,
Right.
not really. Um, um, but as far as the pitch, so I've changed my pitch up, right? And so my pitch changes. So don't hold me to one pitch, but my pitch now is, we do things that other people don't do, won't do, or can't do.
Okay.
And then I stop. And the question, well, that engages that person and say, well, what do you mean? Right? Because a lot of times when you hear the pitch, you hear the words like, we add value by understanding risks and controls for an organization to help them achieve their
Right.
objectives, right?
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, like most pitches have those words, right? Add value, objectives, risk. That's great. We understand that. We're auditors, and that makes a lot of sense to us, right? But if you just tell a person off the street, like, yeah, that's great, right? Like, everyone else adds value too, right? Like, salespeople add a lot of value,
Right.
right? And they're not a cost center. We're a cost center. So to me, uh it's we do things that people don't do, won't do, or can't do. So when you say don't do, if you look at the external auditors, right, they don't give the same assurance that we do. A lot of times you're looking at an external audit from a financial, so they're auditing the face of the financial statements, right? They're auditing GAAP numbers, right? And I'm going to get into some of the details here, right? So, they're not looking at things like adjusted EBITDA, right? Where that might be your company's most important number.
Right.
And we don't realize the external audit, they don't even give assurance on that, right? They give you assurance on net income. Whereas we, not only do we look further than that, but we're we're looking at the entire organization. So we do things that other consultants don't do because it's not within their purview. We do things that external auditors don't do because it's not within their purview. They just don't do those things, right? We do things that other people won't do. When you think about first and second line, right? It's really not their job to test, right? It's not their job to say like to give assurance, right? So and they don't have the independence, right? So they won't do it because they don't have the independence. They can't do it because they don't have the independence, but they also can't do it because they don't have our skill set. Right. They haven't seen the entire organization they don't have the CPAs, the CIAs, the CISAs, the certifications in risk management, right? So they don't have these things. So I think to me, that 30-second pitch is really meant to be more of a 5-minute conversation. And it's meant to kind of to give that person like a reason to say, oh, really? Like, how is it different? And then everybody has their own, you have your own spiel after that,
Yeah.
right? But I do think it is fundamental, right? That there are certain things that like if you were talking to a CEO and they were like, well, why do we need you? I have finance, I have accounting, I have, I have IT people. And that's where you can kind of say, well, yeah, you have your external auditors, they don't do this. You have your first and second line, they won't do this. Uh, and you have your first line, and or you have everyone, and they can't do it because they don't have our skill set.
The consulting thing that you said, that I used to say this also, and actually like it better, but I always say we're like a mini consulting firm, but you only have one client.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I'll say like um, we're like a version of McKinsey, but internal. And they go, oh, McKinsey consulting, that's cool.
Right.
That sounds interesting. Yeah, I want to do more of that.
Right.
So I've always liked that. All right, so now we've pitched, and
Yeah.
we have some new members on the team, still building out the team. What's one of the more, would you say, more important things or aspects in building an internal audit team?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's not one size fits all, and we already kind of said, you might have a 5-person team or a 50-person team, right? What I've seen, what really works best is just having a diverse team, and I mean that in the most general of senses, right? So maybe an example, company I worked for a while back, uh, maybe 10 or 12 people, and all of those people went to the same big state school, and they went to the same Big Four firm, and they worked for 4 years at that Big Four firm, and they all work on the same team, right? And at some point, you kind of have the same ideas, right? You have the same background, you have the same thoughts process. So for me, just having a team that has done different things, obviously, right? One of the things that we talk about in audit is you have your business process and you have your IT audit. I think as a profession, we need to merge those a lot more. I think, my challenge to the IAA and ISACA is, hey, how do we become, a lot more towards that one person so that they can do both? But at this point, right, we probably have a lot of organizations where you do need, people with IT expertise. But, even further than that, when we're working at companies, have people on your team that know the operations, right? Maybe you can hire someone directly from operations and maybe they're not an auditor. I've seen that work really, really well, right? Because when you're an auditor, you want to know how things work. If you have someone that's come from the organization, from the actual operations, that's going to be really great. Um, I would also say, we need to have better job descriptions, right? We need to be a little bit more flexible for our job descriptions, and I've seen this. This is mostly geared towards like at the CAE level, but if you look at any CAE job description, it's going to say, "What do you need?" CPA and Big Four, right? Why? Well, we don't know, but those are really great things to have. That may not translate exactly. So I think going all the way down to, the senior and the staff level is be more open. And we've seen this. We've seen, hey, there's a shortage of accountants, right? There's a shortage of accountants. That means there's a shortage of auditors, right? And so we need to expand a little bit there and be a little bit more diverse. The other thing is, just kind of thinking through it. I think we've all done the personality assessments, right? So Myers Briggs, um, disc. When I think about Myers Briggs, right, we probably have a lot of what introvert, sensing, thinking, judging, right? Introvert, sensing, ISTJ. We probably need more extrovert, intuition, feeling, perceiving, EIFPs. There's probably not a lot of those in the world. Same with the disc. We probably have a lot of dominance and conscientiousness. We need a lot more of the influence, which is outgoing, enthusiastic, someone that can sell internal audit, someone that can sell you on what we do, and steadiness, which is accommodating and being humble. Right, we're not really necessarily known for some of those things. So, I think being able to bring in people to your team that just have different experiences, different skill sets. We don't have to abide by this kind of cookie cutter uh, concept of what an auditor should look like.
All right, Mike, I'm going to give the mic to you. You can close this out if you want to include any more golf tips, maybe expand beyond just hit the ball. I'm sure there's people on the edge of their seat waiting for more golf tips. Whatever,
Golf,
take it.
just watch more YouTube videos and see what works for
Perfect.
you. And if you're in Orlando and you want to play golf, hit me up. But no, I maybe a couple different points, and they're on the different end of the spectrum. But one of the things that we had talked about was really just from a SOX perspective is embracing it. And if you look on LinkedIn, if you looked on all this stuff, SOX is still this really dirty word. And I have a presentation called "SOX is your friend," right? Where it is, hey, let's do that thing where I said, let's take a step back. Let's understand why we do SOX, right? If you asked a CFO, hey, do you want to have good controls over policies and controls over approvals and controls over estimates? They would say, yeah, absolutely. We want to have all those, right? Well, those things are SOX in a shell, right? So sometimes you have to trick people into being SOX compliant and just kind of say like, hey, these are some really good things for the organization. And by the way, while you're at it, we are checking the SOX boxes. But outside of that, on a more personal scale, what I'd really like to challenge auditors out there is just to get out of your comfort zone. I spend a lot of time kind of saying like, we should do this, we should do that. But it really, a lot of, where I've gotten, a lot of what I've done is just trying to be out of my comfort zone. So, please volunteer for your local CIA. Please volunteer for your local Institute of Internal Auditors chapter. Volunteer for your local ACFE chapter. If you're in any other organizations, please volunteer. Be a mentor. It's very easy to be a mentor. Find someone who has one thing in common and take them under your wing. Be a mentee. Look for mentors. Just like I said, get out of your comfort zone. If it's not speaking, if it's maybe just another skill, get out there and do it. A lot of times, there's this negative connotation about internal audit, right? And it's unfounded a lot of times, but a lot of times it's up to us to give ourselves that better image, right? So do some things that you can to promote the profession, please. When you can, say good things about about internal audit to students. Work on your pitch, and from there, go out there and hit them straight.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Audit Podcast. Whatever platform you're listening on right now, I'm sure there's a subscribe button somewhere, so please hit the subscribe button there. If you're listening through iTunes or Spotify, feel free to go give us that 5-star rating. It only took me about 16 seconds to give myself a 5-star review, and it really helps to get future guests to come on the show, so we'd really appreciate that. Lastly, be sure to check out the show notes and follow us on all our social media channels on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and on TikTok. Also, if interested, please sign up for our weekly newsletter from the Audit Podcast. Thank you all. Have a great one.